Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth. Tonight, we are tracking what may be the most dangerous escalation in the Middle East since the Iraq War. The United States is pulling embassy staff out of Israel, China is evacuating its citizens from Iran, and the drumbeats of war are growing louder by the hour.
I'm Maya Clarity, and this is not a drill. We have 5 major stories tonight that, when you connect them together, paint a picture of a region on the brink. From Washington to Tehran, from Kabul to Ramallah, the pieces are moving fast. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss how they all fit together.
We're going to take you through each of these stories with the depth they deserve, because what mainstream outlets are giving you is headlines. What we're going to give you is the architecture underneath those headlines, who's making the decisions, who profits, and who pays the price.
And I want to be clear with our audience from the start, we're drawing tonight from reporting by the South China Morning Post, Al Jazeera, and Middle East Eye. These are outlets with journalists on the ground in the regions we're covering. We're going to fact-check, cross-reference, and give you the full picture.
So let's get into it. Story number 1, and this is the big one tonight, the United States has authorized the departure of non-emergency embassy staff from Israel. Let that sink in. Not from Iran. Not from Iraq. From Israel, America's closest ally in the region.
That's right, Alex. According to the South China Morning Post, this move came on Friday as the Trump administration threatened strikes on Iran and pressed forward with what the report describes as its biggest military buildup in the Middle East in decades. This is not a routine security precaution. You do not pull staff from Tel Aviv unless you believe the situation is about to get very hot, very fast.
And here's the critical context. This comes just one day after a round of Oman-mediated talks between Iran and the United States. These were seen as, and I'm quoting the reporting here, a last-ditch bid to avert war. There was some initial optimism. But that optimism was quickly tempered when Tehran warned that Washington must drop what it called excessive demands to reach a deal.
Let's break down what those excessive demands look like, because this is where the story gets real. The Trump administration has been pushing a maximalist position on Iran's nuclear program. We're talking about not just halting enrichment, but essentially demanding Iran dismantle capabilities it has spent decades building. From Tehran's perspective, that's not negotiation, that's capitulation dressed up as diplomacy.
And what's happening simultaneously on the military side tells you everything about where Washington's head is actually at. We're seeing carrier strike groups repositioned in the region. We're seeing bomber deployments. We're seeing logistics chains being built out across the Gulf. When you authorize the departure of embassy families and non-essential personnel, that is the bureaucratic machinery preparing for a conflict zone.
The pattern here is one we've seen before, and it's critical our audience understands it. Before the Iraq invasion in 2003, there was a similar diplomatic performance, talks that were designed to look like good faith negotiation while the military apparatus was already in motion. The question tonight is whether we're watching that same playbook unfold with Iran.
And make no mistake about the scale of what an Iran conflict would mean. This is not Iraq. Iran has a population of nearly 90 million people. It has sophisticated missile capabilities. It has proxy networks across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. A strike on Iran doesn't stay contained. It becomes a regional war almost immediately.
Which is exactly why the embassy staff departure is so significant. The United States is not just preparing for a strike on Iran, it's preparing for Iranian retaliation against Israel. That's what this move tells you. Washington knows that if it hits Iran, Hezbollah and other allied groups may launch attacks on Israeli territory. They're getting their people out of the blast radius.
And the human cost of this, the people who live in these regions, who don't get evacuated, who don't have embassy flights waiting for them, that is the part of this story that rarely makes it into the policy discussions in Washington. We're talking about millions of civilians across multiple countries who would bear the brunt of this escalation.
The Oman talks are worth focusing on for a moment, because Oman has historically been one of the few neutral mediators in the region. The fact that even Oman-brokered diplomacy is failing tells you how far apart the two sides are. And it raises a serious question about whether the diplomatic track was ever intended to succeed, or whether it exists primarily to provide political cover for military action.
That's the question, Maya. And it brings us directly to our second story tonight, which connects to this in ways that go beyond the obvious. Now, this next piece is an opinion column from Middle East Eye by Professor Joseph Massoud, and we want to be transparent about that. This is analysis and commentary. But the arguments it raises deserve serious engagement.
The piece examines the broader trajectory of Secretary of State Marco Rubio's State Department and its policy orientation across the global South. The argument Massoud makes is that when you look at the totality of actions, from the approach to Iran, to policy shifts in Africa, to the posture toward Latin America, There is a pattern of confrontation with nations and peoples across the developing world that carries deeply troubling racial and colonial undertones.
And here's where we as journalists need to do our job carefully. We're not going to simply repeat the headline. What we are going to do is look at the evidence the piece presents. Rubio's State Department has escalated confrontations with multiple nations simultaneously. The Iran nuclear standoff is one front. But there's also the aggressive posture toward China, the pressure campaigns across Africa, and the hostility toward international institutions that advocate for developing nations.
The factual record is worth examining on its own terms. Under Rubio's leadership, the State Department has defunded programs focused on diversity and global equity. It has pulled back from multilateral institutions. It has shifted resources toward what the administration calls great power competition, which in practice means confrontation with nations that don't align with Washington's strategic interests.
And the critique that Massoud and others raise is that this isn't just geopolitics, it's a worldview. When you systematically target the sovereignty of nations across Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia, when you dismantle development programs, when you withdraw from human rights frameworks, the pattern speaks louder than any individual policy decision.
Now, what makes this relevant to tonight's broader coverage is the connection to the Iran escalation. The maximalist demands being placed on Tehran aren't happening in isolation. They're part of a foreign policy doctrine that prioritizes dominance over diplomacy, that views negotiation as weakness, and that is willing to use military force as a first resort rather than a last one.
And we should note, this is an opinion piece, and reasonable people can disagree with the framing. But the underlying policy decisions it references are documented facts. The defunding, the personnel changes at state, the pivot away from diplomacy, those are real. And they have real consequences for people around the world who are on the receiving end of American foreign policy.
The question for our audience is always the same: who benefits from this posture? And the answer is consistent. Defense contractors benefit. Fossil fuel companies that profit from Middle East instability benefit. Political actors who need an external enemy to consolidate domestic power benefit. The people who don't benefit are the ones living in the target zones.
Let's move to our third story, which takes us inside Palestinian politics at a moment of extraordinary fracture. Middle East Eye is reporting that internal rifts within Fatah, the party that controls the Palestinian Authority, have surfaced after a senior leader publicly backed Hamas.
This is a hugely significant development, Alex, and it's one that most Western media outlets are barely covering. Fatah and Hamas have been rivals for decades. The split between them, with Fatah controlling the West Bank and Hamas controlling Gaza, has been one of the defining features of Palestinian politics since 2007. A senior Fatah figure breaking ranks to support Hamas represents a potential tectonic shift.
And the context here matters enormously. This is happening against the backdrop of the devastating war in Gaza, which has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians and displaced virtually the entire population of the territory. Within Palestinian society, there is a growing sense that the Palestinian Authority's strategy of cooperation with Israel and the international community has failed to deliver statehood, security, or dignity.
According to the Middle East Eye reporting, this internal dissent reflects a broader grassroots sentiment within Fatah's own base. Many Palestinians, including those who have historically supported Fatah, are questioning whether the path of negotiation and institutional politics has reached a dead end. The senior leader's decision to publicly align with Hamas is both a personal political gamble and a reflection of that deeper frustration.
What's critical to understand is what this means for the Palestinian Authority's legitimacy. President Mahmoud Abbas has led the PA for over 2 decades now, and his authority has been increasingly questioned both domestically and internationally. If senior members of his own party are publicly breaking with the factional line, it signals that the center of Palestinian politics may be shifting in ways that will reshape the entire conflict.
And let's talk about who benefits and who loses here. Israel's government has long used the Fatah-Hamas split to argue that there is no unified Palestinian partner for peace. If Fatah begins to fracture further, or if elements of Fatah align with Hamas, it gives the Israeli right wing exactly the argument it needs to continue opposing any Palestinian state. Paradoxically, Palestinian unity could be used as justification for deeper Israeli intransigence.
On the other hand, if this signals a genuine move toward Palestinian political reconciliation, Fatah and Hamas finding common ground, that would be one of the most significant developments in the conflict in years. A unified Palestinian political front would change the dynamics of international diplomacy, of negotiations, and of the internal governance of Palestinian territories.
But here's the complication, and this is where the geopolitics get really tangled. The United States and the European Union both classify Hamas as a terrorist organization. If Fatah leaders are aligning with Hamas, it gives Washington and Brussels a pretext to further isolate the Palestinian Authority, cut funding, and tighten the diplomatic noose. So this internal Fatah shift, whatever its motivations, carries enormous external risks.
And we need to connect this to our earlier stories. The potential US-Iran conflict, the broader posture of the Rubio State Department, all of this creates an environment where Palestinian political agency is squeezed from every direction. Iran has historically supported Hamas. If Iran is under attack, Hamas loses a key backer. If the PA fractures, Palestinians lose institutional representation. The walls are closing in from multiple sides.
The human dimension of this cannot be overstated. We're talking about a population that has endured decades of occupation, that is currently living through a catastrophic war in Gaza, and whose political leadership is fracturing at the moment they need unity most. The people caught in the middle of these power plays, the families in Gaza, the communities in the West Bank, they're the ones who pay for every miscalculation.
Absolutely right. Now let's turn to our fourth story, which takes us to a different theater of conflict but one with equally serious implications. Al Jazeera is reporting that air attacks on Kabul have pushed the Pakistan-Taliban crisis into what analysts are calling uncharted territory.
This is a story that has been building for months and is now reaching a critical inflection point. Pakistan has conducted airstrikes inside Afghan territory, targeting what it says are militant hideouts linked to the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, the Pakistani Taliban. The Taliban government in Kabul, which took power after the US withdrawal in 2021, has condemned these strikes as violations of Afghan sovereignty.
Let's set the scene here, because the dynamics are extraordinarily complex. Pakistan was one of the original backers of the Afghan Taliban in the 1990s. It provided sanctuary, training, and logistical support. But now, the Afghan Taliban is in power and is either unwilling or unable to control the TTP, which has been waging an insurgency inside Pakistan. So Pakistan finds itself under attack from a group that operates from territory controlled by its former proxy.
Al Jazeera's reporting highlights that analysts are warning this escalation may embolden armed groups and destabilize both Afghanistan and Pakistan. That's the key phrase, both countries. We're not talking about a contained border skirmish. We're talking about a dynamic that could unravel security across an entire region that is already deeply fragile.
And the scale of the TTP threat to Pakistan is real. Pakistan has seen a dramatic surge in militant attacks over the past 2 years. Bombings, assassinations, attacks on military convoys, the TTP has demonstrated it can strike across Pakistan, from the tribal areas to major urban centers. Pakistan's military establishment views this as an existential threat, which is why it's willing to take the extraordinary step of striking inside Afghanistan.
But here's what makes this uncharted territory. The Afghan Taliban has its own military capability now. It inherited billions of dollars in American military equipment after the US withdrawal. It has hardened fighters with decades of combat experience. If Pakistan's strikes escalate and the Taliban decides to respond militarily, you have two nuclear-armed neighbors. Pakistan has nuclear weapons, in a direct confrontation, with armed non-state actors operating in the middle.
And the international community is largely absent from this crisis. The United States, which spent 20 years and trillions of dollars in Afghanistan, has essentially washed its hands of the situation. China has economic interests in the region but has been cautious about getting involved militarily. Russia has its own concerns. There is no great power broker stepping in to de-escalate, which means this crisis is being driven entirely by local dynamics with no external check.
The humanitarian implications are staggering. Afghanistan is already experiencing one of the worst humanitarian crises on earth. Millions of people are food insecure. The Taliban's governance has been marked by severe restrictions on women and girls. And now you add airstrikes on the capital city, Kabul, into that mix. The civilian population is trapped between Pakistani bombs, Taliban rule, and grinding poverty.
And for Pakistan, the domestic political situation makes everything more volatile. Pakistan has been through political turmoil of its own, economic crisis, political instability, civil-military tensions. A war with Afghanistan would be catastrophic for Pakistani society, for its economy, and for the millions of Afghan refugees living inside Pakistan who could face a backlash.
The pattern we keep seeing tonight, and this is going to be important when we connect everything, is that conflicts are escalating in the absence of diplomacy. Whether it's US-Iran, Israel-Palestine, or Pakistan-Afghanistan, the diplomatic channels are either broken or being deliberately abandoned. And when diplomacy fails, the only language left is force.
That's exactly right. And it brings us to our fifth and in many ways most alarming story of the night. The South China Morning Post is reporting that China has told its citizens to get out of Iran, and I quote, as soon as possible, as fears of a US strike grow.
This is an extraordinary development, Alex. China's foreign ministry issued a statement saying there has been a significant increase in external security risks in Iran. They warned Chinese citizens not to travel to Iran and told those already there to strengthen their security precautions and evacuate as soon as possible. Chinese embassies and consulates in Iran are reportedly assisting with the evacuation.
Now, let's be very clear about why this matters beyond the obvious. China does not issue evacuation warnings like this lightly. Beijing tends to be cautious, measured, and understated in its diplomatic language. When the Chinese Foreign Ministry says significant increase in external security risks and tells its citizens to evacuate as soon as possible, that is China signaling that it believes a U.S. military strike on Iran is imminent or highly likely.
And this connects directly to our first story. The United States is pulling embassy staff out of Israel. China is pulling citizens out of Iran. Two of the world's three largest military powers are simultaneously evacuating personnel from the projected conflict zone and its likely retaliation targets. When you see that kind of coordinated preparation, the diplomatic talk about negotiations starts to look like window dressing.
China has significant economic interests in Iran. Iran is a major oil supplier to China, and the two countries have deepened their economic relationship in recent years, particularly as Western sanctions have isolated Tehran from other markets. A U.S. strike on Iran wouldn't just be a military event, it would be an economic disruption that reverberates through global energy markets and directly impacts Chinese interests.
And here's the geopolitical chess game. China has been careful to position itself as a mediator and a voice of restraint. But if the U.S. strikes Iran, Beijing faces a choice. Does it stand by and watch a major economic partner get attacked, or does it take a more active stance? Every option carries risks. Silence looks like acquiescence. But confrontation with the United States over Iran could spiral in ways nobody can predict.
What's also notable in the South China Morning Post reporting is the timing. This evacuation advisory came after the latest round of U.S.-Iran talks ended without a deal. That suggests China has intelligence or at least a strong assessment that the diplomatic window has closed. Beijing wouldn't alarm its citizens and disrupt economic activity in Iran unless it believed the threat was credible and near-term.
And let's think about what an attack on Iran would look like from the ground level. Iran is a country of nearly 90 million people. Its population centers are massive. Tehran alone has over 8 million residents. Even targeted strikes on nuclear and military facilities carry enormous risks of civilian casualties, environmental contamination, and regional fallout. The human cost calculations are devastating.
The other dimension here is what happens to global energy markets. Iran sits on some of the world's largest oil and natural gas reserves. A military conflict would likely shut down or severely disrupt Iranian energy exports, which would spike global oil prices. That means people from Detroit to Delhi would feel the economic impact of this war at the gas pump and in their heating bills.
And let's not forget the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical choke points in global trade. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through that strait. Iran has repeatedly said that if attacked, it would close the Strait of Hormuz. Even a temporary closure would send shockwaves through the global economy that would make the 2008 financial crisis look like a hiccup.
So let's step back now and do what Truth Report does best: connect the dots across all 5 stories. Because when you lay these stories side by side, what you see is not 5 separate crises. What you see is one interconnected system of escalation.
That's exactly right. Start with the center of gravity, the potential U.S. strike on Iran. That's the thread that runs through almost everything we've covered tonight. The embassy staff departures, China's evacuation warning, those are the direct indicators. But the ripple effects connect to every other story.
If the U.S. strikes Iran, Hezbollah and other Iranian-backed groups may retaliate against Israel, hence the embassy evacuation. Iran's support for Hamas gets disrupted, which changes the calculus for Palestinian factions, contributing to the kind of internal Fatah shifts we discussed. The regional destabilization empowers non-state actors everywhere, including the TTP in the Pakistan-Afghanistan theater.
And the broader foreign policy posture we discussed, the pivot from diplomacy to confrontation, is the connective tissue. Whether it's the approach to Iran, the stance toward the global south, or the absence of American engagement in the Pakistan-Afghanistan crisis, the pattern is consistent. The current administration has decided that American power is best projected through force, not through negotiation.
And who pays for that decision? Not the policymakers in Washington. Not the defense contractors who will see their stock prices surge. Not the oil companies that will profit from the price spike. The people who pay are the Iranian civilians living under the threat of bombardment. The Palestinian families in Gaza with nowhere left to go. The Afghan children in Kabul hearing bombs fall. The Pakistani communities caught in a cross-border war they didn't choose.
What we're witnessing, Alex, is the failure of the international system to contain multiple simultaneous escalations. The United Nations Security Council is paralyzed by vetoes. Regional organizations are too weak to mediate. And the one country with the military and diplomatic power to de-escalate, the United States, is instead choosing to be the primary accelerant.
And I want our audience to understand something about the media landscape as well. These stories are being covered in fragments across different outlets. The South China Morning Post covers the China angle. Al Jazeera covers the Pakistan angle. Middle East Eye covers the Palestinian angle. But almost nobody in mainstream Western media is connecting these stories into the coherent picture they actually form. That's why shows like this one exist.
The synthesis matters because it's how power operates. Governments and corporations benefit when crises are covered in isolation, when the public can't see the patterns. When you understand that the Iran escalation, the Palestinian political crisis, and the Pakistan-Afghanistan conflict are all symptoms of the same systemic failure of diplomacy, you start asking different questions. Better questions. Harder questions.
And those questions lead to accountability. Who decided that diplomacy with Iran was less important than military posturing? Who benefits from a fractured Palestinian political landscape? Who profits when Pakistan and Afghanistan are at each other's throats? Follow the money, follow the power, and the answers become clear.
The defense industry is projected to see record profits this year. Energy companies are already pricing in conflict premiums. Reconstruction contractors, the same ones who made billions off Iraq and Afghanistan, are positioning for the next wave. War is not a failure of policy for these actors. It is the policy.
And that brings us to what you, our audience, can do with this information. First, demand that your representatives answer direct questions about Iran. Not talking points, answers. Is there a diplomatic off-ramp? What are the criteria for military action? What is the plan for the day after a strike? These are questions that deserve answers before a single bomb falls.
Second, pay attention to the sources. The reporting we've drawn on tonight comes from journalists who are risking their lives to tell these stories. Support independent media. Support international journalism. The less you know, the easier it is for those in power to act without consequence.
Third, understand that these crises are connected. When someone tells you the Pakistan-Afghanistan conflict has nothing to do with Iran, or that Palestinian politics don't matter to your daily life, they're either uninformed or they're lying. In a globalized world, every conflict is connected to every other, and the consequences reach every doorstep.
We started tonight by telling you this isn't a drill. Two major powers are evacuating their people from the projected conflict zone. Diplomacy has stalled. Military assets are moving into position. We may be weeks, days, or hours from a decision that will reshape the Middle East and reverberate around the world.
That's the truth tonight. Uncomfortable, urgent, and necessary. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Stay informed. Stay critical. And we'll see you next time on Truth Report. Good night.